Assalamu alaikum, friends of BookBytes. We're coming to the end of the season, but we are still having this amazing choice of literary reads and much to look forward to over tonight's session. We're looking at a book by local author Saaleha Bhamjee called Home Scar, her debut novel. But this writer is both entertaining and so prosaic, so beautifully insightful in her writing that I really enjoyed this little novel. To introduce you, Saaleha Bhamjee, well, she's been writing on the blogs for a while. She's written a lot of short stories. She's a full-time chef in restaurants. You're owning and baking for very popular labels that she owns, obviously, as Upcycled Cafe, Laziza's Bakery on the East Rand, and Origami Asian Food. Upcycled Cafe's cheesecake was recently judged to be one of the best in Joburg by 947's Anele and the Breakfast Club. This is huge accolade. This is a deeply talented woman in more than one way. She's had short stories shortlisted 3 times for Ritualism, and Homescar, of course, is her first novel. It's with great pleasure that I welcome you onto Book Bites this evening. Saaleha, assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the show.
Walaikum salam, Jazakallah for having me. After that intro, I'm even a bit intimidated. But inshallah, we'll be okay.
No, I mean it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. I've admired your writing for a long time, and it's very, very valuable that your work is out there, that we can actually read it, that the public is now able to pick up copies of Homescar. And what does it feel like to finally have this labor of love in your hands in print edition form?
Honestly, when it was like finally real, it actually felt a little surreal because it had been like in the making for so long. I think at some point I've just about given up with the idea of ever seeing it in print. And then it just happened and it was like, okay, don't give up. Don't give up on your dreams.
I'm so glad you didn't, because I mean I guess there's a time for everything. A time to write and a time for it to actually see the public.
And also I think everything happens when it's meant to. So I think maybe earlier I wouldn't have been ready for it. I don't know. But I just think everything happens when it's meant to happen. And that's how it was with my book.
Let's talk about the title. I mean, Home Scar. Having read this beautiful story, there's a lot to be said of it without giving too much away. But let's talk about what the title means to you and how you came about choosing this title to to package this particular story.
Okay, so to give people an understanding, so a home scar is actually, I don't know if any of you have seen rock limpets on the rocks at the coast. So what happens is when the tide comes in, they move around, they graze, and when the tide goes out, they go to their home scar, which is like a little imprint on the rock that fits their shell perfectly, and then this insulates them from all the external elements. But I liked the play on the word home scar because the truth is, the first scars that we all have inflicted upon us often come from home. And this is true of our protagonist. Those were her first scars. So a home scar is that place where you're completely safe, but is also that place where you get to understand what a scar actually is all about. So I liked the play on the words and also the idea that, look, for her, without giving a lot away, her home scar is her faith. Literally, that's where she goes to every time. And I think for a lot of us, that is what it comes down to. That is the place that insulates us from whatever's happening around us. So I think that's why I felt it was an apt title.
It certainly is. I think it's very meaningful, but also very, I suppose, imaginative and emotional as well. Having read the story. And I especially appreciate your inscription, which I read after I read the book, because I dived right into the book. May your home star always fit perfectly. It's such a beautiful inscription. Thank you for that. I mean, I really cherish having that inscription within this beautiful story. And I think titles do matter. How the way babies are born and named, titles of books really do matter. Speak to us about the journey, where writing the story began for you.
Um, you know what? I actually don't know how Asma came to be very honest. It was like an idea I had, and then I wrote an initial draft. And as I've said before, that initial draft was shockingly bad. It was like really bad, and the story was a lot bigger. There was like a lot more, but the characters weren't fleshed out sufficiently. There was like a lot missing. And then, so I tinkered with it a lot. Embarrassed to admit, I actually sent that initial first draft like to people. But you know how is it when you just finish a book, you're like, oh my God, I did this thing. Everyone look. There's that. But then, like, I think when you go back to it and you look at it and you think to yourself, like, sure, if I was a reader, I would not read this. I absolutely would not give this the time of day. And that's what made me rework it. And then I kind of made a deal with myself that when I turned 40, I needed to have a version of it that I liked. So when I turned 40, I was done. I had a version that I liked. And then I told myself, well, look, you agreed that you would write it, but at no point did you say it needed to go anywhere. So I left it. I just forgot about it and left it. And then I saw a call for submissions from Mojaji Books. And I thought, well, I don't really have anything to lose. Like, send it out, and the worst that can happen and the most likely outcome will be she'll say no, and life will go on. And then I sent it out, and some months later, I got back an email saying they're publishing. And I was like, okay, I did not see that coming, but Alhamdulillah, and that's where we are now.
I think we can have huge appreciation for writer process because you're right. When you first put a draft out, it takes so much out of you. And you've put it out there. There's a lot of expectation, and you feel like you've put everything you can. Your blood, sweat, and tears sometimes go into developing those characters. So full appreciation for that. And it's so amazing when you can work those drafts and then have that perspective of looking back and saying, "Oh, I didn't realize I could have fleshed this out in this way, cleaned it up in this way." You were once looking at a block of concrete, and now you've got the sculpted piece in front of you. So you definitely have that renewed perspective. When you write short story compared to writing and completing your novel manuscript for in any future any other writings you have, what for you is the bridge between the two? The tight writing of the short story, the limited amount of words that you have in order to tell your tale, and something like fleshing out the novel, which is a lot more, maybe more forgiving in its method.
Mm. Look, I think initially I loved the short format. I mean, that was my favorite. I have a whole complete collection of short stories that Mojaji actually wanted to publish a while back. And then we worked on it, and it just never saw the light of day. So I've got that whole collection ready. But I think a novel is more challenging, to be honest, because with a short story, you've got to build up. You don't have a lot of space to flesh out a character, to add too much nuance. There's not a lot of room, right? It's a tiny canvas, and then there needs to be an outcome at the end. So meaning you've got your character development that happens in the space of a few thousand words. And whereas with a novel, it's like a long process, and your reader needs to remain engaged throughout that process. And that's a lot harder. I think to write, I mean, that's why a lot of us will pick up a novel, start reading it, and leave it halfway through because you lost interest in the character, or you lost interest in the story, or something about it didn't work for you. And that's why I kind of like the short format. But a novel was an education. Like, writing a novel was really an education.
I appreciate hearing your perspective because this is both for you. You speak as a reader and as a writer. So these comments are for potential writers, for writers themselves, but also for readers who will be able to appreciate and understand the kind of process that one goes through. Let's get to the book, to the story. You've got Asma. You get to write her in different sort of timelines, right? She's a 5-year-old in one point, she's a preteen, she's a teenager, and so many different things happen in her life that develop your character, but also endear her to us as the reader. Talk to us about the nitty gritties of the story, the timeline in which it's set, the cultural aspects that come through.
Okay, look, I chose to set it in the 70s because I wanted our climax to come 76. So I needed to obviously work backwards. So obviously, all of it was set before I was born because I was born in 77. So I was basically like, I had to do a lot of homework, but also like, I was very anxious about the first chapters. It was, I think, writing as a, like, from a child's perspective, from a child's point of view, has got to be the hardest thing any writer gets to do. I honestly think that's so difficult because you don't want to sound patronizing. You don't want to sound like your child is also too grown up, but also she doesn't. You don't want her to sound too childish. It's a balance. It's very difficult. So when I did those chapters, I think those were the chapters I was most uneasy about because I was like, did I capture her voice correctly? Would a 5 year old say this? Would a 5 year old do this? Would this be the thought process of a 5 year old? It was hard. Those were, yeah, those were nerve wracking chapters. Then I think the sort of preteen ones were a bit easier, and obviously the teen ones, because I mean your teenage thinking is closer to adult thinking, so that was a lot easier to do. So there was remaining cognizant of that. And then it was odd because during the writing there were things that I did subconsciously that an editor pointed out to me afterwards that I didn't even realize I had done. Like, for instance, when she was younger, she refers to her mother as mummy. Then she gets older, she says mum. And that wasn't conscious on my part. It wasn't like I thought this is what needs to happen. It just happened. And when we were working on editing, then the editor pointed out that, okay, I noticed the shift, but this is because she's older, so it works. So it's actually interesting how that
Right.
played out.
But you're a mom as well. You're a parent, right? So, I mean, subconsciously or not, you would kind of say, look, some of the, maybe all the kids don't follow the same line. Speak to us about that connection between being a parent and writing through the children's voice.
Look, now when I look at my book and I look at the messages that come from it, and I'm a parent, okay? And then I think to myself, Um, I wrote this when they were a lot younger. Are these the messages I want to give the teenage versions of my kids? So I look at that. But like, yeah, I mean, I did draw on my kids the way they would speak. Okay, look, if I have drawn on the boys, there would have been a lot of slang, like a lot. But I drew a lot on that. So that did help because you watch kids play, you watch kids do, you listen to the things they say, all of that. So I could draw on that. So that was one plus. But like I say, it was still nerve wracking. It was like you did not want to come across as, for it to sound contrived. I think that was the thing. I didn't want it to come across sounding contrived because I know I read a book this year, which was from the point of view of a child. And the language for me was like a child would not use this language. So as much as I enjoyed it, but I knew that the language was definitely adult language. That was not a child. So it's a balancing act.
It's very interesting, I think, to make those observations, especially as a writer, and also to hold it in yourself to want to come across as authentic. So I think those are definitely pluses on your journey. And you've done it successfully. You're also engaging some very serious topics, some topics that are social issues not necessarily dealt with openly, especially for the time that you're writing. You know, a time when traumas were just kind of handled. And here's a child who's aware that they might get in trouble if they speak about certain traumatic instances that they go through. Do you want to engage some of those topics without giving away too much of the plot line?
Okay, look, I mean, the reality is, as much as I wrote this and set this in the 70s, I don't think that the experience today is that different within our communities from what it would have been for a girl in the 70s. I don't think it has changed as much as we'd like to believe it has. So I did feel that these were important topics to bring up because they are prevalent in our communities. And I don't believe that they are addressed in such a way that the victim is given sufficient empathy. Too often the message comes across that it's your fault that it happened. So, I mean, these were things she had to grapple with. And I touch on a lot of in some ways, I think that what I wrote was slightly feminist, if you will, because I point out the issues with the patriarchy, the ways in which Asma is subservient, the ways in which I point these things out. But obviously, I'm not smacking anyone over the head with it. It's there. You, as a reader, can look at it, can decide whether you think this is okay or not. I mean, different people will read it and see different things. At the end of the day, everything we read, everything we experience, we filter through the lens of our own lived experiences. And I think that'll be the case for anyone reading the book. You're going to, for some people, I know some people told me that, listen, this was triggering for me. I needed to put it down. I needed a little bit of time to process before I could continue. So I know from some people's perspective, this is what they came back to me with. And for others, I mean, there were people that thought it was my story, which was nice. I mean, there was a lady that came up to me. She's a customer at the restaurant, and she came up to me and she's like, "I need to give you a hug because you've been through so much." And I'm like, and then it clicked. Oh, okay. She read my book and she assumed that's my life story. I didn't know how to correct on that one. I'm ashamed to admit I couldn't correct her.
But I think, look, this is interesting because it's allowing that bridge of empathy to be drawn. And for a lot of people, they won't understand that you can actually step back and write a story that might not be your own experience, but that you want to create these conversations, that you want to relate and be relatable through your stories. And you've done that. You've done that with the story in many ways, you know. What are
Well,
your
look, I do hope
hopes?
so. Look, I hope as a book, as a work of fiction, I don't think like I saw Zara Jinnah did that review for me, and she said like she always grappled with how much to reveal, how much to conceal, what are your responsibilities as a writer. I think at the end of the day, your core responsibility as a writer is to tell a good story. I think at the end of the day, whatever story it is, whether it's science fiction, whether it's crime, whether it's whatever, tell a good story in the best way possible. That's your responsibility. Whatever issues you choose to bring into it that you hope is going to get people to engage and maybe to introspect and maybe to look at their own lives and determine whether they in certain aspects can do better, like if they see themselves in your character and they see the problems with your character in themselves. If it gets someone to introspect, if it gets someone to interrogate their own behavior, then I think you've written a successful story, which I think as writers we all hope to be able to do. Not just write a good story, but to also write a successful story.
And I mean, there's so much that you cover here in a modest book.
Mm,
And I was thinking about the sort of the timeline that you're writing. You write about apartheid South Africa. You write about the violence of our society, but there's the beauty of romance. There's this connectivity through the generations, whether there's a generational sort of struggle, but there's also these bonds and these good intentions that comes through generational interactions, right? Between parents and children. We always say parents are doing the best they can with the best they have, and it doesn't always come out right. So let's talk about some of that, right? The human elements, the connections between people in romance, difficult marriages, the violence of society coming into the home, and the relationship between different generations, parents and children.
Look, I should hope that the story I put out there is an accurate portrayal. It's a snapshot of basically, it could be anyone, it could be anyone's life. Because you would have in your life the romance, you would have in your life the discord between parent and child, you would have in your life the idea that you owe your parents a certain um, debt of gratitude. There are certain responsibilities that you need to uphold as a child, but also when these are at odds with what you want, it becomes a difficult thing to do. So I mean, those were all the themes basically that came through, the ways in which she tried to juggle being the good daughter with still having what she wanted, which was quite difficult actually. And then, but life is hard, right? The truth is, everyone deals with different challenges every day, but life is also beautiful. There are, I look at kids and I think the children's laughter reminds us that, and the way kids smile, you find a child. I mean, we look at all these horrific pictures coming out of Gaza, these videos. You see all of this all the time, and then you still see these children swinging and playing and laughing. And children are reminded that there's still beauty in the world. No matter how much horror human beings visit on one another, there is still so much beauty in the world. And it's up to us to still look for this beauty. It's up to us to still have an eye that can appreciate it and be thankful for it. And I hope that in my book, that is the message I conveyed, that yes, life is hard, that yes, we are going to go through some insane tests and difficulties, but at the end of it all, we can still smile, we can still be thankful, we can still see the beauty. And for me, I think that was the message.
It absolutely comes through in so many ways here. What can we hope to see in the future from your writing?
So while we were doing the editing of Home Scout, the editor kept asking me, I want to know more about Harith. Like she kept coming to me, I want to know about Harith. Tell me about his activism. Tell me. And I kept telling her, but this book is not about him. I had to keep telling her, this is not about him. This is about her. This is her story. And so then I sat down and I said, well, let's tell his story. Let's understand what happened, why he did the things he did, why he made the choices he made, why he didn't make the choices he didn't make. Let's just understand. So I've started writing that actually. Um, I'm hoping I'll have a decent chunk of it by the end of this year. And it's been interesting. I mean, I think writing his side of the story required a lot of research. So I've been getting my hands on a lot of books by struggle veterans, a lot of academic reading, like articles about controversies where and so I've been doing a lot of that research, and it's been interesting. As South Africans, we take so much for granted. So researching his story has basically made me realize how little I know about my country. It's been interesting. It has been.
So what we're saying is we can look forward to a kind of sequel for Homescar.
Yeah, it is a kind of sequel. Yeah, because it's obviously told from his perspective. So Asma is in the story, not as prominently as he featured in her story, but I think that's a woman failing, if I can call it that. I don't know, but like it's his story, his journey, his activism, how he became a part of the struggle. It's literally the whole. Yeah, that's what I'm working on. So it's a sequel in its own way.
I really look forward to that, especially after having just read Homescar. And do you think that writing from a male perspective is difficult? Has it been a challenge for you?
Um, I think male perspective is somewhat easier. In the sense, look, I read a lot of books where men write as women or women write as men. And what I notice is like men don't have time for all the flowery stuff. So there's less of that. There's a lot less of that. Yeah, it's more straightforward, which has been refreshing to do. I've enjoyed that actually. Like just bare bones, getting there, saying what needs to be said. Obviously, a lot because I even in Homesky I use a lot of the colloquialisms, your Afrikaans, all of that comes in, and because he's a colored kid, there's going to be a lot of that. So I'm going to obviously have to run it by people from within the community and tell them, ask them if I actually got his language right, because that is going to be a small challenge, I think.
But it seems like you're definitely taking it on with a lot of positivity, so it'll come through beautifully, especially when you have so much of empathy for your characters. And I would definitely want to read after having read mostly Asma's sort of perspective. I would definitely want to read Farid's point of view in the coming months or in in the next year or so whatever, whenever it's ready
Oh,
for
well,
us. I'm
Home's
very
got to
glad
go
to
over
hear that.
10 years. Yeah, Home's got to go over 10 years to meet the world. Let's hope this doesn't take 10 years. Let's hope. Let's hope.
I know that you're a master at the short stories, so I'm hoping that we get to see your short stories out there as well because you did hint that there's a collection. So I'm just like poking and planting the seed and saying let's hope and pray. In
I
the
think
meanwhile, you've done.
okay, like I think now that I'm older, I must revisit those short stories and see how I can improve them. I think that needs to be the trick.
For now, Homescry has been so beautifully developed and presented, and I know that many of the readers and viewers will be enjoying picking up this copy over the next few weeks, especially now that it's the holidays. It's the perfect time to read. I love the nostalgia that you present through the story, the innocence, and yet there's some real social commentary in here that I think would appeal or bring out a lot of empathy in readers because you're dealing with issues that are still, like you say, under wraps, not really spoken about. We might not have the tools to still deal with some of the issues that are faced through these stories. And I think it's important that fiction is used as a vehicle for that. So I think you've done that successfully, and I know people will enjoy reading this book. What is
Yeah.
your message to readers, and where can we find copies of your book?
So copies are available online. If you search for it, you'll find through the Mojaji website, through Love Books. I've even got them at Upcycled. And also, when we did the launch, we did the one in Cape Town, and a newspaper covered it, and the headline was Chef Writes Erotic Coming of Age Novel. And I wanted to die. I was like, the woman sat through the interview with us. Where did she come with this Where did she come with this headline from? So it's not that. If any of you have seen the headline, it's not that. But yeah, online and at Upcycled, I've got copies as well.
It's interesting. Sometimes reviewers don't actually read the work and then make a certain assumption or make a one-liner that can really dent your intention. So it's good that you have an opportunity to speak out about it. But I also want to commend you because your creativity expands in so many ways. As a follower, as a friend, I've also seen like you've done such amazing things with your bakery. There's these mouth-watering dishes that you present through your restaurants and your fusion foods and various things that you do. And now you've captivated through the creativity of this novel and various of your short stories. So I wish you everything of the best, Saaleha, on your journey. We look forward to seeing what you come up with in the future. And I hope that this inspires more of our young ones to write our stories and to put them out there, whether it's a memoir or whether it's in the form of fiction that you have done in this particular instance.
Well, I do hope it inspires young people. And also, I mean, you're never too old to realize a dream. My book came out and I was like almost 47 by that point. So never too old.
Alhamdulillah, thank you for those inspiring words, and we wish you everything of the best, especially over the festive season when people will be visiting to partake in the delicacies that you have through the various your bakery and your restaurants, and obviously to pick up, I think, signed copies of Ska, Home Ska, from one of the places, one of your spaces on the East End. So we wish you all the best once again. Jazakallah khair for your time, and assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam and Jazakallah for having me.
And so there you have it. We spoke to author Saaleha Bhamjee, who's based in the East Rand, and she's recently come up with her novel, her debut novel, Home Scar, which is a beautiful story. Please do get a copy and let us hear your thoughts, join in the conversation. This is a beautiful homegrown story that I think will make a lovely gift for this end of the year, for the holiday season. And that's it from us this weekend on Book Bites. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.